Three, two, one. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Nine Hole Podcast. This is your host, Ian Miller. Today, I am excited to have a baseball data company on that's kind of innovating the way that they prepare players and kind of help them out in fixing strategies, building them up, and processes to attack their weak points. I will talk to my guest here, Chad Miller, about what ID Evolution is doing and how they are changing the game. Chad, it's an honor to have you on today, man. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me on. Heard a lot about your podcast. I'm really excited to be on, and my business partners are super stoked that I'm making the appearance today with you.
I love that, man. I love it. Again, I'm appreciative of your time, man. I'd love to hear more about your story. I'd love to hear more about what ID Evolution is all about. We had spoken offline a little bit about what you guys had going on, who you are, and it was extremely interesting. I was intrigued right off the bat. The website's incredible. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about all the kind of services, products you offer, devices, and the plans that you offer to your players, man, and how you're going about it. Just before we get into it, what was your story in the game of baseball, man? How did you come up in it? When did you fall in love with it? All that good stuff.
Yeah,
if you don't mind.
No, I was very fortunate, very blessed. My mom and dad owned a small sporting goods store in Clarion, Pennsylvania, or Knox, Pennsylvania. I always joke because it's a suburb of Clarion, which means that we literally had more cows than people. It was awesome. They started the sporting goods store when I was 4 years old. So I was literally hitting in a cage from the time I was 4 until the time I was like, I think I was like the sideshow for the sporting goods store because people were like, "Who's that little psychotic kid out in the cage hitting for 8 hours a day?" But no, my dad was an American Legion baseball coach. He's actually in the American Legion Baseball Hall of Fame, which is really cool. And so he ended up getting into that. And so I've been doing like bat fittings and coaching ever since I literally was 4. And then went on to play at Cleveland State University in Pennsylvania, or in Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland, no offense to you, was too cold. I ended up transferring back to a small school called Slippery Rock back in the days where dinosaurs walked the earth. You couldn't transfer Division I to Division I without having to sit out. So I ended up transferring to Slippery Rock and had just an amazing experience playing for Coach Jeff Messer. And then went on, tore my bicep my senior year, went on to then get into coaching, where I coached, did the camp circuit, did everything. And my first coaching stint was at Penn State Beaver in Rochester, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And had a great experience there. Had a really good team. Then ended up getting hired at Marshall University, where I was a hitting coach there, and then also served, did recruiting, did catching, and then got recruited in the medical device space, which was interesting because at the time I was recruiting this kid from Knoxville, Tennessee, and his dad turned out to be a regional vice president for a medical device company, and we're walking through him, giving him the tour, and he's like, "Hey, what do you make a year?" And I was like, "Wait a minute." I'm like, "Why are you asking me that question?" I'm like, "I'm not going to be your high school baseball coach." And so he was like, "No." He's like, "Seriously, what do you make a year?" And so I'll tell you what. I said, "If your kids tell me that I'm in the number 2 spot, or 1 or 2 for them coming here, then I'll tell you what I make." And he goes, "I love that." He goes, "You're always closing. You're always trying to get the kids to commit." And I was like, "Well, he goes, "I'll tell you what, you're number 2. He goes, "You're in the top 2. It's between you and University of Tennessee." And I said, "All right, fair enough." I go, "I make $24,000 a year." He goes, "You have your master's degree." I was like, "Yes, sir." He goes, "How are you even affording to live?" I said, "Well, I live in Huntington, West Virginia." And he's like, "What if I tripled your salary?" I'm like, "Now you have me interested." And so fast forward about 4 months, I went out and shadowed some things. And I've an undergraduate degree in sport management and marketing. And then I have a double major in exercise science. And my master's is in interpersonal communications. And this guy was in orthopedics and orthopedic sales. And I was like, this is a really intriguing field. And the weird thing was we were playing University of Louisville. And I got back on the bus after the game, checked my flip phone, opened it up, and there's a text message saying, "Hey, Chad, your contract is on your fax machine. I tripled your salary, what you make at Marshall. I gave you a car allowance, and you also get your cell phone paid for. And I was like, my head's spinning all the way back to Huntington, West Virginia from Louisville. Sure enough, we walk in the office about 3 a.m. I pulled the contract off the fax, walked into my head coach's office, and I said, Dave, what do you make a year? And he was like, I make my base salary is 50. If we make the conference tournament, I get $1,000 bonus. If we make a regional, I get 2,000. And he laughed, and he was like, if we make the College World Series, he goes, I'll make a $5,000 bonus, and then I get a car. And I looked at that. My offer was for $75,000, and I was like, Dave, I think I'm going to have to move on.
Yeah.
And so I moved on, went into medical device, had a really interesting career in that, and I'm still in 2 companies. But in 2019, Coach Messer actually came to me. He was the president of the ABCA, or the American Baseball Coaches Association. He said, hey, man, why don't you come up to Indianapolis and watch my speech? And I was like, yeah, sure. So we went out to dinner afterwards, and Coach Messer is literally like a second father to me. He's just an amazing human. And we're sitting there, and he's like, we're in trouble. I was like, what do you mean we're in trouble? You all right? And he's like, I'm like, is the program okay? And he's like, no. He's like, baseball as a collective industry is in trouble. And in 2019, analytics became very prevalent, and this is pre-COVID. And he's like, if I go out and I recruit another hitter that I watch collapse their back half and literally pop up to the pitcher, he's like, I'm gonna go nuts. And he's like, not to mention the amount of injuries that are going to come from this, and not to mention the things that are going on. And he said, you've got all these science guys trying to learn baseball. You have all these baseball guys trying to learn science. And the problem is we have 10.5 million people caught in between that are parents, coaches, and most importantly, players. And the water is extremely murky right now. And he said, Chad, the reason why I invited you here is that you're my only meathead geek that I know. He's like, you speak science really well, and you speak baseball really well. And he's like, I need a translator. And so unfortunately, COVID hit. I was able to I had some time. And again, like I said, medical device has been very good to me, and I've been blessed financially. I was able to take some time, and I traveled to 31 different baseball technology companies, and I personally interviewed them. And I was like, I want to find out where the lapse is at, because in medical device, I'm very OCD, and I'm very like hyper. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to be the best at it. And so when I learn about something, I not only learn about my product, but I also learn about my competitor's product, probably to the extent I know it better than I know my own product. And so I ran around, I just went to all these different companies. And what I found is that baseball technology, there's no barrier to entry, which is awesome. But it's also very scary in the sense that there's no governing body. Like there's no FDA, there's nothing really that limits technology from appearing to, if you and I come up with a cure to cancer, it's going to take us 3 years to get that product to market. If you and I come up with the greatest baseball piece of technology, as long as we have the resources, the budget, and the technology to get it done, it's a Friday today, we can have it on the market by Monday. And the issue with that is as great as it is, it also is very disruptive. But most importantly, it doesn't allow for people to become experts in that technology. Gotcha. So therefore, we have a bunch of guys that are learning off technologies. They really only know half of the capacity. So therefore, we're teaching half the story. So as much as it helps people, it also hurts them. And so understanding that and really taking a deep dive, we almost need a funneling mechanism, and not a censorship by any means, but you have to really understand the technology before you can use it, because it's the old adage, I know enough to be dangerous. Well, there's probably 1 million baseball coaches out there that know enough to be dangerous about anatomy, physiology, but most importantly, the techniques that they're teaching that are putting kids in harm's way. If you think about, and this would really spark me and what brought Coach Messer and brought me into the fold, was if you think about orthopedics and the injuries that are now occurring, we have the highest rate of Tommy John in the month of April in the history of baseball this season. We have more oblique strains are up by 32% year over year. You have abdominal strains, you have lower back issues, you have a lot of pars defects. These are all injuries that aren't just injuries that happen by chance. Handmade injuries. 98% of all handmade injuries are preventable. And so, yeah, 100%. And it's the technologies that are being released because we have people that know half the story that are putting techniques, technologies, and really systems in place that are Instagram experts. And I know that's a very strong statement, but it's one of those things that we're very passionate about. And that's really the antithesis and the inspiration behind what we did. So back in 2019, Coach pulled me in. And then I also, because living in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was able to have relationships with Louisville Slugger, I started the Louisville Slugger Hitting Science Center. And it went really well. I put about $2.5 million of my own money into developing this very cool, basically building and facility. What I found, going back to my original statement, was within 4 months, the technology I dropped millions of dollars on was out of date within 4 months.
Dang.
And I'm like, it was a happy day and a sad day, because what I found was that the technologies that I had been just constantly researching were quickly able to get rid of it. You know, if you think of like Edutronic, Qualisys, all those camera systems, 3 years ago, they're operating at 240 frames per second. Now they're at 700 frames per second. Our iPhones operate at 240 frames per second now. So what you could do 2 years ago, you can literally do off your iPhone, which is what we do. And that's why that's why I got rid of my facility, because I can reach a lot more players by having my backpack is now my biomechanics lab.
Gotcha.
I have an iPad, I have pressure insoles, and I've got 2 iPhones, and I can pick up 1.1 billion data points off those 3 types of systems. And that's what's so cool about where we're at today in the space, is that technology is evolving and allowing the scalability of high level coaching all the way down to the T-ball level, which makes it really cool. And, you know, we started out, you know, our niche still is scientific bat fitting. And we're probably one of the top 3 entities in the world at doing it. However, what we were able to do, and partnering with Alan Thomas, who's my business partner out in Arizona, you know, Alan was the strength and conditioning coach at the big league level for the White Sox for 26 years. He was the only 2-time Nolan Ryan Award winner in the history of MLB, and he had the lowest injury rate for 15 years in all professional sports. So now I take our data and our analytics, and I put those metrics, and most importantly, the evaluations and profiles of those players in a guy like that's hands. Now we're optimizing players at a level that has never been done before. And so that's what's so cool. But our vision is really, you know, 2 years ago, we were in front of 800,000 players, whether it be our partnerships with MLB, partnerships with minor league teams, or our partnerships with large camp and showcase organizations. Our vision, our messaging was out in front of 800,000 people. But now we're actually shifting our focus, and we're going more into education. And we've aligned ourselves with a company called LER, which is Lower Extremity Review Magazine. So we're going to be doing our first really practitioner integrated medical coaching and parent clinic in the history of baseball. So we'll have orthopedic surgeons on there, we'll have spine surgeons, we'll have podiatrists, we'll have physical therapists, we'll have performance coaches. We've got Tim Hires, who's a big league hitting coach for the Rangers. We've got college coaches that will all be presenting in this forum, because I think it's very important at this point in time, this juncture, to have an integrated approach to this, because there's so much information out there, and it's not bad information, but it's being misconstrued in many, many different ways, that it has to be aligned with physiologic and biomechanical and anatomical principles, or else coaches can really put players in harm's way.
That makes sense, man. That makes sense. I love all that. Appreciate you kind of giving us the intro into how you got into the game, how you got into the business world. It's incredible to see that you can go from the baseball world to maybe, you know, medical device sales, and come on back, make a huge, absolute huge impact, man. So with, you know, you would mention that you guys are still an expert in the bat fitting space at heart. That's how it all started. So you are able to take a player's metrics, right? You take all that data and you use that data and analytics to tell them maybe what's the best bat they should be swinging, what model, maybe a certain mechanic. But you're able to take that data also and build strength programs and kind of programs for them to move forward. Am I right with that?
Absolutely. And so one of the things we look at, so if you look at what Marucci really started scientific bat fitting, and they need to get the credit for that. So that was BPL, or Baseball Performance Lab. And that's how I got pulled into it. I went to Wilson. I said, "Where are you guys struggling at?" And they said, "Well, we're really struggling in scientific bat fitting. Marucci has taken market share based upon marketing, player investment, and then scientific bat fitting. And really where Marucci, their intent was really good, but they kind of went off the path a little bit, because it's all based upon exit velocity scores and horsepower tests and things like that. The issue with that is that, one, you're in a controlled environment. Two, they use marker-based motion capture systems, which you as a former big leaguer understand more than anything. You put something foreign on your body, your organic swing is not going to be the same. And 90% of the time, your organic swing off of a pitching machine, your timing is going to be off. If you're hitting off a machine you never hit off of before, it's a different swing path. And so what we do is we actually take 24 KPIs. So key performance indicators off that swing. So that's a combination of biomechanical foot profile. We look at your center rotational axis. We're looking at internal and external rotational scores, both mobility and also strength. We're looking at grip strength. We're looking at mobility and stability scores. We're also looking at range of motion of your cervical spine, your thoracic spine. We're also looking at swing path. We're looking at zone of contact length, and we're also looking at optimization of that. And then we're also looking at radial deviation, which is effectively wrist mobility. And so part of that is injury prevention. Part of that is optimization. And then part of that is actually looking at where we can actually take and then build your player development plan so that we can optimize your barrel behind the ball. So if you really think about baseball, I always make this joke. I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan or not, but there's an episode where George, basically, for lack of a better term, didn't have sex for like 3 weeks, and he ended up becoming a genius. And so he sat down and he studied the force equation in physics, which is mass times acceleration. That episode isn't off. It's actually reality. And from that perspective, a baseball swing is nothing more than mass times acceleration. And so if I rotate really fast, right, that's great. If I have my bat barrel behind the ball for a long time, that's really great. But if I have both and the sum of all parts equal the whole, now I've got an optimal swing. What's interesting is that biomechanically, your bat will either drag, or it will whip, or it will stay parallel to the ball. Those are really the only three outcomes of a baseball swing. And we're going to miss if we drag sometimes. We're going to miss if we whip. But if we stay parallel to the ball for as long as possible, now we're able to optimize the kinetic energy transfer from our swing to the baseball. And so what's awesome about baseball is that you have a thumbprint for a reason. The way that you got to the baseball and the way that I got to the baseball and the way that Aaron Judge and Pete Alonso get to the baseball are completely different. But one thing is consistent. If that barrel stays behind the baseball for as long as possible, you're going to have an optimal outcome. And so that's what's so cool about scientific bat fitting is that we're looking at how does your bat barrel actually get to the plane? And then once it's in the plane, what basically analytics and what flight path is that barrel taking to make sure that when you hit we all think about it, a home run is a beautiful mistake. That means you caught the bottom half of the ball with the sweet spot of the bat, and the ball is going over, I think it's 86 and 26 is what it takes to get a ball out of 320 feet.
Okay.
And so the problem is you can't do that every time because you'll never hit the same pitch twice. But what we can do is optimize we can basically mitigate your risk. So you being a in the financial planning world, your whole entire job as a financial planner is to mitigate risk.
Yep.
My job as a bat fitter is to mitigate risk and control the environment. And I can do that by taking 24 KPIs and looking at 9 different points on the bat that I can adjust to give you a potential of 6,012 different variations of one baseball bat.
Dang, man. So just breaking that down,
at a little higher level. So what I am hearing is that a player or a younger softball player, younger baseball player, a player can benefit from you, from ID Evolution, what you guys are doing, if they want to find out more in depth about their swing, what the optimal swing looks like, how to do it, the certain factors that go into it, how you're measured, maybe the specific bat and how all that plays into it. A player at any age, right, at any level, being softball or baseball, can benefit from you and ID Evolution by finding out more about their swing, finding out what the optimal swing is and how to do it.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is that if you look at the different philosophies that are out there right now, Teacher Man or whomever else you want to talk about, right? Joey Cunha or whatever his name is. You look at all those guys, I applaud them. They're putting themselves out there and they're going out in a social media presence. But one thing they have to realize is you can't cookie cut kids. You can't do it. And so as we go through things, when we identify a player ID Evolution, what our goal is that what do you do really, really well? I want you to do more of that. What do you do really poorly? I want you to do less of that. It's kind of like, doctor, it hurts when I do that. Well, stop doing that.
Yeah.
And so, if I can give you a bat that allows your bat barrel to stay in the zone longer, you will be more successful.
Awesome. That makes a ton of sense, man. That do less of what you're doing bad and do more of what you're good at. That's fantastic. It's great scientific advice right there. And out of the 24 KPIs that you are measuring, that you are mapping, that you are seeing where there's deficiencies, which one do you think is the most important and that is a telltale sign like, okay, this specific KPI is rather low? Just without even kind of consuming all the other information, I can tell the swing we got trouble with this swing. What KPI? Balance?
Balance, 100%. So if you think about the most simplistic form of a baseball swing, balance begets direction, direction begets timing, and if your timing's off, you're not hitting the baseball. However, you got to go back to the root cause. If you've got poor balance, you are not going to be successful at any aspect or facet of baseball. And so to give you a funny quick story on this. So my friend, he actually did my neck surgery. He's one of my best friends. He's my spine surgeon, Dr. Jeff Gum in Louisville, Kentucky. Calls me up, and he's a fanatical parent. I love him to death. But he's like, I want you to work with my 5U team. And the day before, I was working with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And so I'm like, all right, what am I going to do with a 5U baseball team to make it impactful for them? These kids are worried about butterflies, kitty cats, and petting puppy dogs. And so I'm like, how do I make this fun? And so what I did was I was like, I just need to look at their functional athletic movement patterns. And the number one thing that we have to do to make that player better is balance. And so if you think of your foot, it's like a 3-legged stool. And we've all been to restaurants where we've had a wobbly 3-legged table. We put a sugar packet underneath it. We put a napkin underneath that short leg. It balances out the table. Your foot is exactly the same way. In order for you to optimize your glute function, if I'm going to get really far in the weeds, the number one thing I have to do is get your gluteus maximus to engage in your swing in order for you to optimize your exit velocity. Has to happen. That's why when we work with big leaguers, they've got an exit velocity of 5.1 miles per hour improvement. College players 4.3, high schooler is a 3.5. The reason being the variance is the way it is that big leaguers understand their movement patterns better than anybody else. They understand their body. They understand how to make corrections. And so one of the things we teach, and it sounds really funny, is it's called hard butt, squishy butt. If your gluteus maximus isn't engaged right below your belt line, your butt's going to be squishy. If your glute max is engaged, your butt's going to be hard. So the first thing I had to do with these 5-year-olds was I had to teach them to get their big toe, their pinky toe, and their heel into the ground. Think about the heaviest squats you've ever done in the weight room. I can guarantee you your feet weren't like this and they weren't like this. They were like this.
Yeah.
In order for you to be an athlete, or if you're playing defense in basketball, or you're playing soccer goalie, you're playing middle linebacker on a football field, your feet at the point right before tackling in a football field is big toe, pinky toe, heel, because you need your glutes to engage so that you can impact force on that player that's trying to run you over.
Gotcha.
And hitting a 96 mile an hour fastball is absolutely no different. If you look at all the great hitters, when they're in they go from their load to their land, and they're in a position, number one, their eyes are on a level playing field. Number 2, their shoulders are level. 3, their hips are level. But most importantly, when they're in their loaded launch position, it's big toe, pinky toe, heel in the front. It's big toe, pinky toe, heel in the back. And now they're in an engaged position. And so,
wow.
Yep.
So not to cut you off. Sorry, man. Jeez.
No. And so as we go through that now, we've done EMG studies, which is basically studying the energy and the nerve conduction that goes from your nerves to your muscles. What we found was we did a study of 200 professional baseball players. And out of those 200 professional baseball players, only 15 engaged their glutes appropriately. And the ones that didn't engage their glutes appropriately had over 30 home runs. And it's all a function of balance. So the number one thing, if you're a coach, that you need to be teaching your players is balance. I'll take it one step farther from you. So this year I rehabbed 33 players that had TJ. They were pitchers. Out of the 33 players, 32 of those guys had what's called a varus throwing side foot, which means that their big toes up like this. So in looking at the fundamental pitching principles that are being taught right now, hip hinge is being taught by everybody. And what's the whole entire premise of hip hinge? To get into your glute max and to engage the ground. The problem is if I'm in a position, I try to hip hinge and I'm not balanced, my big toe comes off the ground like that. So now if you study motion capture, it takes 50 milliseconds for your toe to hit the ground. And the reason why that big toe is so important is that 32% of your force production comes from your big toe, whether you're throwing or you're hitting.
Really?
So now I go, boom, that's 50 milliseconds. Well, if you work up the chain, now my hips are 50 milliseconds slower. Now my shoulders are 50 milliseconds slower. Now my elbows 50 milliseconds slower. But most importantly, now my fingers are dragging behind the ball by 50 milliseconds. So now think about this. Now my hand slides below the baseball, my fingers slide below the baseball. But most importantly, that force production is now right on my UCL.
Dang.
So unless I get your big toe on the ground in the sit position as a pitcher, you're putting yourself at risk and you will re-injure yourself.
I am highlighting that. That is insane. Just all from foot position, how you're balancing, how you're preparing. So I struggled, man, personally. Excuse me. I was a little speed guy, right? So I would put the ball on the ground and I would run and I would outrun the baseball, outrun the throw. But eventually you get to a level like AA where ground balls in the infield, they're outs, man. They're like, regardless of how quick you run, you could run a 6'2". So me being fleet of foot, I was always the type of dude that, ran on my toes, tend to walk on my toes a little bit more, as a little springy. You know what I mean? That always translated to balance issues in the box. That always translated to, not necessarily being in my heels, but not being solid in the ground. I'm up on my toes. And man, I remember in 2020, I think it was 2020. So this is the year that COVID shut everything down. I think Jock Peterson was with the Cubs in spring training. He was with the Cubs that year. I believe that was 2020, unless it was 21. Pretty sure it was 20. And so I was there with him in spring training, and I just tried to be around him because he is a left-handed hitter and he is incredible, right? And he's had success at the major league level, consistent success. And so I wanted to see how he went about his business. And like you said earlier in this segment, that, major league players know their swing better than anybody else. They know what makes it tick. They know what fuels it. And so I had noticed that Jock would kind of dig into the dirt a little differently. And with his back foot, he would pigeon toe it and get up on his toe a little bit. And that was because, I guess, in the off season, he broke it down. He got the baseball data. I don't know what the process was, but to optimize his swing, that he needed to start like that and try to maintain that because of, his hips. And I don't necessarily remember like the scientific explanation behind it, but that guy turns, he's not thinking when he's in the box. So it's more so of a mechanic, maybe to unlock something. So that it popped up in my head. When you're talking about the optimal swing, at some point you need to have, your pinky toe in there, your big toe in there, and your heel in the ground. So like maybe if that was a way, if he needed to start that way, pigeon toed on his toe, maybe that was a way for him to unlock it, maybe at a certain position or at a certain point in the swing to optimize, man. It's crazy. Just right there, what you were saying.
Well, it's interesting. So I'm actually working on a project. So have you ever heard of Squares Golf?
Yes.
So I was approached by them in 2022 to develop their shoe line for them, just because of what we're doing. And, I can teach. So again, if I'm in a varus position, my big toes up like this, I teach kids press through your your met head, which is your first met head, which here is your big toe and your heel. Boom. Now that gets me into my hard butt position. If I'm in a valgus position, which means my pinky toes up like this, I press through my fourth toe and my heel. The reason my fourth and not my fifth, so I tell a little kid to press through their fifth, or a big leaguer for that matter. Now they overcorrect. So now we press through our fourth toe in here. My business partner, Heather Keeper, says this to us. You want to find the sweet spot of your foot. And that sweet spot typically is where you're going to be at whenever you're in a squat position. When you got 500 pounds load on your shoulder, you're trying to squat that weight and not blow out your back. You're going to find that sweet spot of your foot. Well, one of the things that, we want to eliminate, the Yogi Berra the game's 90%, physical, and the other 50% is mental, so it's laughing. But I want to make it autopilot for players. And so Squares approached me. So Squares, their initial research, they get 11 feet extra on their drive if you just put on a pair of shoes, which is crazy, right? But if you think about it, it's all about balance. That's all it is. So Squares has a neutral platform, and they've got a wider toe box. And so that allows for toe splay. And so when your toes expand, it now provides freedom in your Achilles tendon, which then provides freedom in your gastroc and your soleus, which are your calf muscles, which then leads up to your hamstring, which then leads up to your back. So therefore, you're freer and you can move faster. So loose muscles move faster than tight muscles. And so we've developed this platform now with Squares. If you've got less than 9 degrees of deformity in your foot, and everybody's got something, if you got less than 9 degrees of deformity, now all of a sudden, the Squares actually corrects it for you because it allows you to splay your toes, and it pulls your foot down to a neutral position. So therefore, you get hard butt every single time you go into either pitch and throw downhill or you hit. So now, to your point, how do I get you to your point with Jock? If I'm thinking about I need to press through my big toe, my heel as I'm loading, you're screwed in the box, right? Now, but if I can do this and I have the confidence that every time I load, I'm in my perfect balance position, and I'm going to get optimal glute max function, which is then going to set off my kinematic sequence to the point where I'm getting 550 milliseconds of rotation through my hips, 750 through my shoulders, and 1,000 through my hands. And I can do that. I know I'm going to do that every single time. All I got to worry about is just hitting the baseball.
Yeah.
And so that's why when I told you about the barrier of entry being so low in baseball, it's the best of times, the worst of times of baseball, because now I can put a shoe on that does that for me. If I wear Nike, Under Armour, Adidas, that puts my foot into a varus position. So if I've got a varus back foot, guess what? I just exacerbated that condition. If I've got a valgus foot and I wear New Balance, guess what? I just exacerbated that condition because New Balance is built off of a running platform. And so what I have to find out is that you owe it to yourself as an athlete to understand that who you are as a player. If you try to be somebody who you're not, if you were a little speed guy and you try to drop 40 bombs a year, I guarantee you had the worst season of your life.
Yep.
However, if you understood, listen, man, I am really, really good at driving the ball gap to gap and running it out, you had the best season of your year or best season of your career. And so that's where understanding who you are as a player on those 24 KPIs is so important. It's, for example, the big trend right now and why hammates are shattering at record volumes is Marucci made an adaptation called the puck knob. So the puck knob is a counterbalance at the end of the bat that effectively just provides a counterweight to the bat that allows you to get your hands in the slot, get you into more appropriate attack angle, and allows you to, again, the faster you get your barrel in the zone and the longer it stays in the zone, the more successful you're going to be. In theory, great idea, great concept, great principle. In fact, it's been around since 1946. All they did is they took an old bat knob that was in Louisville Slugger's warehouse and put it out there. Congratulations. What is new is old and what's old is new. And so as we go through those things, the problem is that with the inception and adoption of more and more strength training, we've got guys with more and more tight wrists. And so we looked at a scale called the Nakamura scale of radial deviation. And that's, again, very geek speak, but it's a study that was done in Japan for radial deviation, which means basically my wrist mobility. There's a direct correlation between hamate injuries, TFCC injuries, which TFCC is the connective tissue around your hamate, which is the number one thing you're going to tear when you check swing something. If you tear your TFCC, the next thing that's going to happen is a fracture in your hamate. And then for long-term issues with your hamate, you're going to develop arthritis, and that's what's going to sideline you later on in your career. So as we go through this, we want to look at the radial deviation score. If I've got greater than 21 degrees of radial deviation in wrist mobility, I can use any size knob I want to because I've got the freedom, because there's a thing called arcus supination. It's whenever I come through, I swing, I roll over, my hand rolls over, your arcus supination, which is a rollover of your bat, will follow two things. One, the diameter of your handle and your knob, most importantly. And number two, it will flow as easily as your wrist will allow it to. So the more range of motion you have in your wrist, the less chance of a hamate injury you have.
Really?
Yes. And that's proven. So as we go through, if I've got too big of a knob, so the perfect storm for a hamate fracture, big knob, skinny handle, end loaded bat, poor wrist mobility. If I have those combinations of things going on, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to fracture my hamate. So there's certain things we can do. Number one, first and foremost, check radial deviation as a coach on all your players. If you've got somebody who has a stiff wrist, it's literally a handshake test. I'm going to shake the player's hand, and I'm just going to move it up and down just like this. And if it touches my finger on the back side of my thumb, he can touch that. He can use whatever size knob he wants. The other thing, checking your hand length from your middle knuckle down to your what's called your simian crease or your palmar crease right here. The bigger that is, so if it's above 2.7, you know that they either need to have a thicker handle or you need to add another layer or thicker lizard skin or whatever your choice is, right? Surface area contact matters with hands because I've got bear claw donut hands, so I have catcher hands. So I got short sausage fingers, big palm, right? And so if I'm here, and the problem with me, I used to get really bad palmar bruising, especially at higher velocities. If I used, so back when we grew up, I'd use the TPX weight version. If I faced somebody who's 91, 92, I'd always get a bruise there because the bat barrel or the bat handle would slide back in my palm. Now all of a sudden I'm getting jammed up, right? And that was the whole entire purpose and invention of the pro hitter. And so just to keep from that translation of your hand, you actually lose 2% of your kinetic energy transfer through your grip. And so you can actually slow. So if you think about that and equate that to an exit velocity study, let's say that your optimal exit velocity is 100 miles per hour. And we lose up to 8% out our front foot, up to 11% out our backside on a translational load. We lose up to 2% through our hands. We lose up to 6% through postural tilt. Now all of a sudden we're putting all those things together. And before I've even swung at a pitch, I've dropped my potential exit velocity by 20 miles per hour, 20%. Due to just biomechanical faults. And so we can eliminate all those things through just proactive studying of biomechanics and physiology. But going back to the hamate, as we're going through and we roll over, I want to make sure my player's bat handle is fit appropriately so that one, I've improved surface area contact and i.e. control of the bat. Two, I want to eliminate and mitigate risk of hamate injuries and weird range of motion, or basically planes of movement and movement patterns based upon a knob that is too big for my hand and too big for my wrist mobility. So if we can just simply eliminate those two things, we just mitigated risk of a hamate injury, which we know last year was the leading cause of upper extremity injured reserve appearances by players at the major league level.
That's crazy, man. It's insane to even think about, radial deviation, wrist mobility, the balance you have in your feet in the box can not only affect, the outcome and the likelihood of success, but it can also affect, the likelihood of incurring some sort of injury at some point in your career, man. It's crazy to even think about it, which makes it evident that to really optimize your swing, you need to break it down. You need to understand it more. And through those KPIs that you are tracking, that you're, mapping, seeing where the deficiencies are. It really helps you kind of understand every single nuance of your swing moving forward, optimizing it, man. And you guys have the plans in place to make that happen with the instructors and the qualified people in place to make that stuff happen. With all of this, the KPIs you track, with all of the baseball technology that's in today's game. As I started in pro ball in 2013, got out of it right before 2022. So when I started in pro ball, it was almost a different game than when I left, right?
Mm-hmm.
A whole bunch of baseball technology exploded onto the scene. I didn't necessarily understand everything that was being tracked. Man, do you think that this trend continues in baseball? It's just going to get even more technologically advanced. There's going to be even crazier, performance indicators, man. What's your take on that?
It's interesting. I have this conversation a lot. I just had this conversation. I've got a player that I train. And he's a center fielder for a major league team. And we've actually gone, and this is crazy coming from me, we've gone way past the mark. I think the pendulum's going to swing back to the center because we've lost focus of the game in some aspects. Because there's a lot of job justification. I can say this because I'm an independent contractor of major league teams, so I can speak freely, which makes me, I guess, kind of dangerous in that aspect. And I got to be somewhat politically correct, but I can speak freely. Is that there's a lot of job justification going on, and the problem with that is you got baseball analytics and scientists, sports science guys. You've got the strength coaches. You got the hitting coaches. You got the player development coach. You got the, this and this and this and this and this. And the problem is they don't communicate. And as a player, last year I had another one of my players come through and he handed me 63 pages of information that he received from an organization. And this kid's brilliant. He's magna cum laude graduate. He's like, I have no idea what the hell this stuff is. I condensed it down to him in one sheet of paper for him to understand. And I think we had 11 bullet points. And I'm like, here's our plan. The rest of the stuff is great. But why were you given this? And he's like, well, I asked for it. And I said, okay, what did they tell you? They said, you're a professional, figure it out.
Oh, my goodness, man.
So he's just like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, can you help me? I'm like, absolutely. I'll sit down with you. And we broke it down. Second thing is that arbitration has really impacted baseball technology. Because in some organizations, they won't give you that information. Because they'll say, "Hey, you're in your platform year. We want to monitor what you're doing," and so they'll have a book on you that's thicker than any scouting report you've ever seen, and it's all for their attorney to sit down to arbitration table and hammer you on. And so, from that perspective, it's a bad thing. Where it's a really good thing is that we're now able to assess risk, and we're able to develop player development plans at a number one, a rate that's unparalleled, and number two, we're able to impact, and we may be able to see something that gives a guy another extra 3 to 4 years of longevity in their career by simply just doing that scan.
Powerful.
But on the inverse of that, what's happening is that there's a funny story of coaches sitting in a room with a particular sports scientist from an organization and said they're getting ready for the arbitration hearing. And they said 5 out of the 20 home runs this guy hit weren't actually home runs. And the coaches are like, did the ball go over the yellow line? And he's like, well, yeah. But on StatCast, they weren't home runs. It's impossible those balls got out of the yard. Well, was there a wind blowing out that day? Was he facing a guy that was throwing 98 with a 2,400 spin rate and the ball carried?
Yeah. Maybe stadium dimensions and stuff too. Yeah. Maybe it's a short porch or something.
No matter what, that's a home run. It went over the yellow line.
Amen.
But at the arbitration table, they're trying to say that, well, that's not a reproducible thing. Well, Rafael Palmeiro made a living and is, one of the greatest hitters of all time, hitting balls that theoretically and scientifically shouldn't have gone out of the yard. They dropped right over the yellow line and went in the first row. But the sports scientist says that that's not right.
That's crazy.
And so from that perspective, we have analytics, data, and science have hurt us exponentially. Now, the coolest thing that sports analytics gives us is that my favorite thing of all time is base running. And I can tell you, we do a Steel Confidence chart. So one of our biggest success stories of the year this year actually occurred at Dobson High School in Phoenix, Arizona, Chandler, Arizona.
Okay.
We took them from 31 stolen bases to 143. They set the state Arizona high school stolen base record this year. And we simply did it by applying a methodology that allows each player to understand who they are as a player, but most importantly, how big their lead needs to be, and they can be successful. And therefore, if I have the information in my possession, therefore I will be confident, I will be successful. And so what we do is called the Steel Confidence chart. And so it takes the pitcher delivery time home, the catcher pop time down to second, we total it up, nothing earth shattering there, right? But what we do is we do an 81 feet sprint. And everybody looks at me like I'm an idiot when I say 81 feet. The average lead in major leagues is 9 feet. We call that a green lead. That's your base of operations. Your left foot is at 9 feet. We're going to time you straight up. How fast can you get from that 9-foot lead to second base? And if we can do that, and we know that, for example, if I've got my defensive time, my total defensive time is 3.55, your 81-foot sprint is a 3.45, with your neurocognitive function added in at 0.25 for your decision-making time, guess what? You're going to be safe every single time. And so the next lead is going to be an 11-foot lead, which is our yellow lead. And the next lead is going to be an orange lead, which is going to be a 13-foot lead. Now your first base coach, you know your time. Your first base coach has a chart in his pocket. He looks, hey, dude, yellow. You know when that first base coach now tells you yellow, you can steal that base and be safe every single time.
With an 11-foot at least.
Lead.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, man.
And so what's awesome is that now, if you want to talk about the psychological warfare and really have fun with the game within the game, you tell the first base coach or first baseman, hey, dude, I'm stealing. There's nothing you, your pitcher, your catcher, and your coach can do about it.
It's physically impossible.
It's mathematically, I'm going to beat you.
Oh my gosh, man.
And so now, first baseman, and we had this happen with a college I helped consult at. I coached first just to implement it in a couple games. We stole 11 bases in one game.
That's wild, man.
And so I said to him, I said, first baseman, every time I'm like, hey man, we're running. First time he laughs at me. We steal first, or we steal second. I'm like, hey man, we're gonna steal third on this next pitch too. He steals third, standing up with a throw. He gets pissed off. He walks over to the pitcher and he said, this first base coach is telling me that they're going to steal, and they're stealing. So what are we going to do about it? Well, guess now all of a sudden, next time we get a guy on first base, hey man, I want to let you know we're going to steal on this next pitch. So now he's like, hey, pick. He's picking. Now that pitcher's focus is entirely on that guy at first base. He has nothing to do. Guess what do you think the outcome of the next pitch was?
Probably
it's a fastball right down the middle, home run. Because he elevated his fastball, he slide step, therefore he's going to drop his velocity by 2 miles per hour. Ball's up in the zone, it's straight as an arrow. So if you steal 100 bases, you will hit 100 home runs as a team. And so those are the things that analytics can do, and why I like to say the psychological warfare you can have and really put the defense into a really a defensive position. The other piece that I love talking about, and Jim Thome has become a really close friend of mine, and we talk hours on this. The most powerful play as an offensive player is a fake bunt. So if you think about this, if I fake bunt, especially if you're a guy like Jim Thome, right? Now all of a sudden the first baseman comes in 4 steps. So for every 1 step you come in, you lose 2 feet of range to your left and right. So now if I can get you to play even at all times, right, as a third baseman, and let's say we're in a situation where we got a man on second, we're in just a man on second, not a man on first, just a man on second. I show you a fake bunt, first pitch out of the gate, right? And now enter in the factor of that pitcher being worried about the guy on second base stealing, okay? The ball's going to be up in the zone more than likely, right? And so if we look at the count, an 0-0 count, you're hitting 364 on average as a major league hitter. If I get you to 1-0, you're now hitting 387, right? And that's with people playing straight up. But if I can come in and I get that third baseman to play in front of the bag simply by showing a fake bunt on the first pitch, right? And I've got some pop whatsoever. If I'm a right-handed hitter and that second base, the guy on second gets a lead of greater than 17 feet, I'm now pulling the shortstop over by 4 steps to his left. Where did 48% of all ground balls, base hits in the major leagues go through last year?
That the 6-hole?
5-6 hole. I just opened up that feet, that if I got a 17-foot lead at second, I show a fake bunt on the first pitch, I get that guy to come in front of, I get the third baseman to come in front of the third base. I just improved my batting average by another 15 points by opening up that hole by 31 feet.
It's wild. That is wild, man. That's wild. Stuff like that is incredible. On the data, the analytics, what is open to us now, how we can kind of process the information, go about a certain plan of attack, implement certain things in our game, maybe fine tune something. It can unlock a whole bunch of stuff. Chad, I'm extremely grateful for your time today, man. I got one more question for you before we let you get out of here. So this is the 9-Hole Podcast, man, where we give insight and information to the next generation of 9-hole hitters, man, like I was. Man, when you think about a 9-hole hitter in any lineup, man, say you're coaching and you have a lineup, man, what is your 9-hole hitter supposed to be able to do? When you think of a good 9-hole hitter, man, what are the characteristics and traits of that hitter?
Well, if you just that example I just gave you is something every 9-hole hitter should do. Is you have to be able to handle the bat, number one. You have to be an amazing situational hitter. But most importantly, if you think about that scouting report on that 9-hole hitter, 90% are going to say weak ground ball to the left side. How do I open up those holes? How do I make sure that I'm positioning the defense as a hitter? I want them to pitch into my scouting report. And that's one of the biggest things that I think kids don't take into account is that the pitchers are trying to throw to your weakness, especially the bigger levels you go to, right? And not that I want hitters to work on their weaknesses, but when you get into a 1-2, 0-2, 2-2 count, you should actually feel more comfortable with 2 strikes than you do in 0-0 counts as a 9-hole hitter, because they're going to feed into your weakness and you know what's coming. So I'm going to backdoor slider you all to death. Well, if I just did what I told you I was going to do, and I got my defense positioned the way I want to position it, I want to hit a hard ground ball on the left side, because now it's going to squirt through and it's a position I didn't think I was going to be in.
I love that, man. I love that. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Being able to handle the bat, move people around, move runners around, situational hitter, be grindy. Love it, man. Chad, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on here, talking to us about what you guys have going on at ID Evolution, how you guys are changing the game, man. I really, really appreciate your time. Where can people find you at, man? What's the website? What's the socials to go on? Check you guys out.
Yeah, so www.idevolution.com is our website. You can catch us at squaresbaseball.com as well. The other thing is my personal Instagram handle is @BaseballScienceGuy. I have more, and then on LinkedIn it's just Chad Miller. I have more. I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. That's probably my most prevalent platform.
Cool.
But thank you for your time, man. I really enjoy being on here, and anything we can do to help you all, please let me know.
You got it. You got it. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. We will catch you back here later at 1:30. Take care, guys. Thank you, Chad.
Thank you.